First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Syvanne Avitzur. I'm a member of the New Israel Fund of Canada's New Generations Leadership Council. I'm also an NIFC board member. To give you a bit of background, the Leadership Council, the Young Generations Leadership Council at NIFC, leads all of New Israel Fund of Canada's activities for new generations. And New Generations, the community of people in their 20s and 30s who actively support the advancement of progressive civil society and democracy in Israel-Palestine, equality for all those living under Israel's authority, and an end to the occupation. Um, I want to be mindful that during this conversation, we'll be discussing some really difficult, violent content. So please know that we're here to talk and debrief during this challenging discussion. And just please take care of yourself as you need to. So first we'll do some introductions, ask our guest some questions, and then go into call to actions. After that, we'll have a broader Q&A. So we have quite a lot to cover. And before that, I'd just like to also have a land acknowledgement, while acknowledging the fact that land acknowledgements shouldn't be just kind of a check in a box, but rather integrated into a program. And so we are integrating the values of this land acknowledgement into this program. So we are uninvited guests at NIFC. We are based in Toronto, so we're uninvited guests in Toronto, but please reflect on where you're coming in from. This Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. It is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We recognize the dispossession and displacement of Indigenous people and their enduring presence and connection to the land we call Canada. Likewise, we recognize the dispossession and displacement of Palestinians and their enduring presence and connection to the land we call Israel and Palestine, a land that many of us call home. And as Jews, some of us here are Jewish, some of us are not, but we know the pain of expulsion. We know what it means to be at the mercy of others for our own human rights and basic dignity. And drawing on our collective and personal histories, we honor the movement towards self-determination, both here in Canada and in Israel and Palestine. So as I mentioned, New Generations is in charge of this kind of programming, but we're also part of the larger collective of the New Israel Fund of Canada, which is an organization that educates and then collects funds to provide necessary services as well as anti-occupation activism in Israel and Palestine, along with a lot of other things. We're a big tent organization. And one of the organizations that we work with is Breaking the Silence. And we're a longtime partner with Breaking the Silence, which is an organization of veteran soldiers who have served in the Israeli military since the start of the Second Intifada and have taken it upon themselves to expose the public to the reality of everyday life in the occupied territories. So a lot of this work is around stimulating public debate, both in Israel, but also, especially more recently in the diaspora, about the price paid for a reality in which young soldiers face a civilian population on a daily basis, and are engaged in the control of that population's everyday life. So this work aims to bring about the occupation, and also more recently, Breaking the Silence has been increasingly engaged with work in Gaza, which isn't the subject of this conversation, but can be brought in if that's something that would be of interest to people here. And then to give you a bit of background about myself, I most recently went to Israel and Palestine during the Naomi Chazan Fellowship through NIF and through my master's thesis. And one aspect of my thesis focused on how political bureaucracy combined with settler violence and military coordination systemically restricts access to water for drinking and agricultural practices, so for food and for livelihood. And we're continuing to see this happening. I personally stayed in touch with one community, Al-Khair, throughout this year, and attacks there have been more and more coordinated to the point where in the past week or two, I've been getting videos on a daily basis from community members showing intimidation through settlers. For example, from something that seems mundane, like settlers honking their cars on the main road there, to almost running over kids, to taking bulldozers to tear down olive trees. So this is something that I'm sure Amir can kind of broaden out for us on a more systemic, kind of the systemic coordination of that. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our guest, Amir, who is here from Breaking the Silence. Amir grew up in Jerusalem and joined Shomer Latzair youth movement as a kid. During high school, he was a counselor and delayed his military service after graduating to do a gap year as an educator in the youth movement. And then he enlisted in the IDF at age 19 and served from 2008 to 2011 in the Nahal Brigade's 50th Battalion as a combatant and a commander. Throughout his time in the military, Amir served at the border fence between the Gaza Strip and Israel, spent 6 months in Hebron, and deployed to different places in the West Bank. Following his service, Amir worked as an educator in a boarding school. He holds a Bachelor of Education from the Kibbutzim College of Education, Technology, and the Arts, and he has been an activist with Breaking the Silence since 2013 and began the role of Pedagogy Coordinator in 2020. So thank you very much, Amir, for being here with us. And I guess for kind of a broadening out kind of question, could you tell us a little bit about what settler violence actually is and where it's happening?
Yes. Uh, first I'll say thanks for having me and for doing this update. And most importantly, I think for the long partnership, as you said, between us and you. And I will say that I think work you do is crucial. So it's very important on our side to have this partnership. And thank you for doing this. I will say that I was in Toronto 2 years ago, I think, right, Hannah? Meeting the new gens in Toronto. I sadly not able to do it this year, so we're zooming. Um, so before we'll jump into, I think, settler violence, let's talk about what settlers, who they are, what is it, what are settlements, and I'm gonna assume knowledge of a few things, and if I'm assuming wrong, just please ask. Um, Occupation began in 1967 in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Soon after, the state of Israel had started moving Israeli citizens to live within the occupied territories, territories that Israel has never officially annexed to the state of Israel, mostly to the West Bank, some in Gaza as well. And when we talk about settlers and settlements, we're talking about Israeli communities who live outside of the official borders of the state of Israel within the occupied territories, the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Um, there are a lot of those settlements until early 90s, about 127 of them. And since the Oslo agreements in 1993, or more accurately 1995 in Oslo B, we have divided the West Bank to three areas, areas A, B, and C. I won't deep dive into the separation, but I'll just say that area C is about 60% of the West Bank, and that's where all the Israeli settlements are. All the Israeli settlement, and since the Oslo agreements that we have declared we won't build any new settlements, we have started building what we call outposts. That according to Israeli law and Israeli law alone, settlements are perfectly legal and outposts are not. According to international law, none of that is legal. But according to Israeli law, settlements are perfectly legal, but outposts are not. And since the Oslo agreements in 1995, Oslo B, we have, depends who you ask and who's counting, about 170 outposts within the West Bank, all in Area C, except for one and a half in the past 2 months that are in Area B. And that created a reality that in Area C, we have 300,000 Palestinians who live under the direct responsibility of the IDF, both on civil issues and security issues. And we have almost 500,000 Israeli settlers, and they share the same areas, the same grounds, the same, I don't know. Sometimes they are practically neighbors, like in El Khair that Syvanne mentioned, that they share a fence with the Israeli settlement of Carmel. But even though they share the same space and they are both living under an occupied territories, both are subjected to two different law systems. The Israeli settlers are subjected to the Israeli civil law system, and the Palestinians are subjected to the Israeli military law system. And that creates a huge difference. The main one is that Israeli settlers are very rarely subjected to law enforcement. That basically creates a reality in which they can do almost whatever they want with almost no consequences. Now, when we talk about settler violence on the edge of it, like the extreme cases, which are more rare, but in the past 2 years became a bit more uh, uh, reoccurring. But the extreme cases are events like the Goldstein massacre in 1994 in the Tomb of the Patriarchs, in which an Israeli settlement went into the tomb and murdered 29 Muslim worshippers, or the event in Atawani, a village in Safariyata at the beginning of the war, just after October 7th, in which a settler came into the village and shot Zakaria El Adra from, I don't know how to call it, Tvach Efes, just pointed the gun at him at his chest and pulled the trigger. Um, or events like we've seen in Funduk or in Simya in the past few months of settlers invading Palestinian villages, burning houses, burning cars, attacking Palestinians, regardless of what they did or if they actually did something. But when we talk about day to day settler violence, that can be mundane, right? That's the right word in English. Day to day actions that can sometimes seem not very violent, even. But just recently in El Khair, we had a settler, Shimon Atia, very well-known violent settler in the area, that just decided that he is moving into the village, invaded a Palestinian family's yard, and moved in, refused to move. 2 days ago, settlers invaded a Tawani village and stole 20 ships. Sheep, right? You don't, the nests on sheep. And just last night, settlers invaded Shab el Butum, another village in Safariata, in the South Hebron Hills, and cut down 40 olive trees. And it's day-to-day actions. It sometimes doesn't have a physical harm to anybody. But what actually happens is Israeli citizens who do basically whatever they want. The main idea behind it is to make lives of Palestinians as hard as possible in those areas in order for them to willingly leave. Right? We don't want to kick anybody out of their houses because that's a war crime, but we'll just make their lives insufferable so they will choose to live. And settler violence is one key element in that Israeli policy.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And you've already touched on this, but maybe we can kind of, if you can explain a little bit about why we're seeing more violence happening right now in particular, how settler violence in coordination with military violence has evolved since October 7th. And then more recently, we know that you reached out to New Israel Fund of Canada directly to hold this event. And so what is the reasoning behind this? Why is this necessary now?
So I think there are a few elements that have raised the bar, if you will, on settler violence in the West Bank in the past 2 years. The first one is the war in Gaza, where all international and Israeli attention goes to naturally, right? And I will say that I will use the word war because that's the best word I have in English for that. But what's happening in Gaza in the past almost 2 years isn't a war. There are almost no two sides to the event. We're bombarding the Gaza Strip relentlessly. So I don't know if war is the right word, but that's my limit in English. So I'm sorry about that. But all of the attention goes to the Gaza Strip naturally, because what's happening there is horrible and needs to end. But under the I don't know, the excuse or under the reality in which nobody gives attention to the West Bank, the Israeli government and settlers as the extension are doubling down the efforts of and violence in the West Bank in order to kick Palestinians out of their homes. So what we're seeing in the past 2 years, since even more than 2 years, because basically since this Israeli administration took office, that we have high-ranking ministers like Bezalel Smotrich and Orit Struk and Itamar Ben-Gvir who are calling the shots in Israel, who are very violent settlers on as individuals. And we had Itamar Ben-Gvir attacking our tools for years before he became a minister. Um, so they hold a lot of power. They have a very well outspoken agenda, and they're doing whatever they can in order to make it a reality. So we are seeing a lot more violence. The violence becomes a lot more lethal in the past 2 years, and it has dire consequences. Since the war in Gaza began, it again it depends who you ask and who's counting and how. We're talking about more than 30 Palestinian communities who were forcibly kicked out of their homes because settlers decided they move in, because settlers are attacking them relentlessly, because the Israeli authorities, the police, and the IDF not only not doing it, right? Until October 7th, it was very common in the West Bank that settlers are attacking Palestinians and soldiers are just standing there doing nothing. When I was assigned to Hebron, second biggest Palestinian city in the West Bank, in 2010 when I was a commander. And I was told that there are three parts to my job in Hebron. The first one, and the most important one, is to keep settlers safe. The second one is to prevent terror. And the third one is to disrupt daily Palestinian lives, right? Since I memorized the command for 6 months every day, 3 times a day, I can still do that, right? The 50th Battalion will protect the settlers in his area and will provide normal day-to-day life to every settler in Hebron, will protect and stop terror attacks and disrupt the daily Palestinian lives. I can do it in Hebrew by heart still. I was assigned there 15 years ago. But since I grew up in a Shomer Hatzair, in a left-wing environment, I knew there are violent settlers. And when I got to Hebron, I asked my commanders, what am I supposed to do if I see a settler attacking a Palestinian? What my job is? And what I was told is call the cops. You have nothing to do with law enforcement on Israeli citizens. You're not allowed to. The IDF has no jurisdiction on Israeli citizens, which is not true according to the law, but this is what we were told as soldiers. So for years, we had a lot of testifiers at breaking the silence saying the same thing. They told us we're not allowed to do anything, call the cops. There aren't many cops in the area, and a lot of them don't have a political backing to do their job, and a lot of them are settlers themselves and don't want to do their job regarding settler violence. So for years, we saw kind of like the IDF and the police looking the other way about settler violence. The thing that changed since this war is that the IDF took most of his mandatory service soldiers to fight the war in Gaza and brought in a lot of reserve duty soldiers into the West Bank. Now, the IDF in the past 10 years or so is operating in something we call in Hebrew Hagmar, Hagana Merchavit, like regional defense companies, which means you enlist reservists to serve close to home. When we uh, uh, um, enlisted reservists to be on the Lebanese border, there were people who lived near the Lebanese border, and they became reservists to serve on that border. In the West Bank, the same thing happens, but the people who are enlisting to the reserve duty in the West Bank are the violent settlers that until October 7th, the IDF looked the other way when they were attacking Palestinians. Now they still attack Palestinians, but they are the authority in the area. They have the power and the authority of the government basically, because the IDF is the de facto government. So a lot of the violent settlers became soldiers, started walking around in uniform, got weapons, got jeeps, got APCs, and the jurisdiction to do whatever they want in the West Bank. Their agenda hasn't changed after the second they became soldiers. The ideology wasn't put aside. They kept on doing whatever they wanted to do, but now they are doing it as soldiers. And soldiers are not looking the other way. They are the people who are attacking the Palestinians themselves. And that gave them a lot of power to double down the efforts and violence because now they were able to invade random Palestinian homes in the middle of the night for security reasons, to search for uh, materials of terror incitements. They started stopping Palestinian in Hebron. Our Palestinian partners started talking about the fact that reservists are stopping them on the street, taking their phone, going into their WhatsApp application to look for pictures from Gaza. And if a soldier saw a picture from Gaza, regardless of what it is, that was enough to stop that Palestinian for incitement for a few hours to beat him up and maybe even detain him for a few days, maybe a few hours, doesn't matter. All of that was the I don't know, the ground or the elements that kind of allowed settlers to double down on their efforts of violence. And that, as I said before, and as you mentioned a bit about Wacha, that creates a new reality in the West Bank in which Palestinians are moving out of their homes. We have a community in the Jordan Valley who was kicked out of their homes a week ago, a week and a half ago, something like that, because settlers moved in and built a new outpost in their yards, starting attacking them on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's very striking information. Can you, I think something that a lot of people ask about when having conversations about settler violence is where the violence is coming from, if there's some form of instigation from the Palestinian side. Can you speak to that? Just about, yeah, what it I think probably a lot of people in this group also have conversations with maybe family members and friends who will say that. And so what can we say to respond to that?
First of all, that it is important to say that there is Palestinian violence, right? It's a thing, it's a fact. I grew up in Jerusalem during the Second Intifada. I did not grow up in a safe space. October 7 did happen, and we were attacked. Palestinian violence happens. It's a thing. But I will say it not as common as we want to believe or as shown to us. But more importantly, it does not matter. Settler violence doesn't happen only in response to Palestinian violence. And more than that, uh, um, it isn't applied only against Palestinians who attacked us. On top of that, common sense, right? You're not allowed to take law into your own hands no matter what happened. Those settlers are not law enforcement. If there is Palestinian violence, it's the IDS or the police job to do. I would argue that in a legit place, it was the Palestinian police's job to do that, and not a foreign army who is upholding a military dictatorship over those people to stop that violence. But that's the reality we are in. It's not for the settlers to do, even if it was only in response to Palestinian violence, but it isn't. And it isn't not because we're unable to stop this settler violence, not a group of masked people, an underground unit that we don't know who they are and where are they going to operate. That's not the thing, right? I know when a large attack of settlers will happen. Why? Because I'm a member in WhatsApp groups of settlers who are organizing the attacks. It's out in the open on Twitter, on Facebook, on WhatsApp. They are not hiding themselves, right? And if the Israeli government or the Israeli authorities would not want this violence to happen, we would have stopped it already. But the fact is that the settlers are a branch of the Israeli policy. In the Israeli policy in the occupied territories since the beginning is to create a reality in which Palestinians will have a hard time living in the West Bank and for them to leave. I ordered that policy in Hebron and in Ratis and Khalamish and in Gaza when I was a soldier. That's the same policy today. And I think the most crucial element within the Israeli security policies is the basic assumption that we have on Palestinians, right? In our point of view, as soldiers, as settlers, as Israelis as a whole, Palestinians can be members in one in two groups, involved and uninvolved. Those are the only two groups Palestinians can be part of. Involved, in Hebrew, me'oravim, are involved in terror. They are an immediate threat to Israeli citizens, to the Israeli state, to the Israeli, to the IDF. And I, as a soldier, know what am I supposed to do with those Palestinians. I can have my rules of engagement. I have my detain and arrest protocols. I know what to do. The Palestinians who are involved in terror can be involved in terror because I see them holding a gun, shooting at me, throwing stones at a car. But even if they are taking part of protest, which is illegal in the West Bank since 1967, those are involved Palestinians. They are involved in terror for being involved in protests. But the rest of the Palestinians are uninvolved. They are not an immediate threat to the Israeli government, state, society, whatever it is, but they are a potential threat. So Palestinians are either an immediate threat or a potential threat. Either way, a threat. Palestinians cannot be innocent. That's not a category Palestinians have. Palestinians are born a security threat to Israel. And the only question is, are they, if they are an immediate or a potential threat? And since they are all a threat, they are all the enemy. No matter what they do is considered an act of terror. Therefore, everything I do as a soldier is legitimate. But therefore, settler violence is in response for Palestinian violence because their existence is a threat to me. So when settlers are talking about responding to Palestinian violence, that's a bit 1984 discussion of them because it depends how do you define violence. If every time a Palestinian speaks against, writing a post on Facebook against the occupation, he's a terrorist, then obviously everything is violence. Therefore, everything is in response to Palestinian violence. But that's not true. El-Khir that you've mentioned, or Shab al-Butun that settlers invaded yet last night and demolished olive trees. The Palestinian village of Atawani and Susia, they are all part of what we call Mesaferiata, the most southeast part of the West Bank. There has never been an act of violence from Palestinian from Mesaferiata. Never. In the occupation's history, not in the past 2 years, in the occupation's history, not once there was a violent act from Palestinians from Mesaferiata. That's one of the most attacked communities of Palestinians in the West Bank, in Jordan Valley and Mesaferiata, right? Because we have, and the settlers have, they view Mesaferiata as a strategic point. We want to clean Mesaferiata of Palestinians in order to disconnect the Bedouins and the Palestinians from the northern Negev within former Israel and from the southern West Bank. As was written in the Yigal Allon plan from 1967 and then the Ariel Sharon plan from 1977 and the master plan of 1997. Those are all official government plans that say that, black on white. So the use of violence, of Palestinian violence as an excuse it's an excuse. That's what it is. I'm not saying that there is no Palestinian violence. Of course there is, but that's not why we have settler violence. And I will just say that you cannot solve violence with violence, and that's, I think, the bottom line, right? Trying to fix violence with violence will only create more violence. And the only way to stop or to put Palestinian violence to the minimum and settler violence to the minimum is peace. That's it.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful. And I think especially the framing around Palestinians in the West Bank being considered either a threat or a potential threat is very enlightening, especially as we continue to see dehumanizing language and action in the West Bank and in Gaza, as well as in East Jerusalem. Um, so I think what we'll do, we have two more questions. I want to make sure that we have time for calls to action. So let's go to that first and then go to our third question if we have the time. So our fourth question is what you think, and especially again in this context of you reaching out to New Israel Fund of Canada and probably to other diaspora organizations that you work with, what do you see global solidarity looking like in this moment? And then we can talk a bit about a Canadian context as well.
Yeah, sure. I will say that first of all, I think the international community, Jewish diaspora communities as well, but the international community as a whole, the first necessary step is to keep on educating yourself and ourselves, right? We need to know as much as possible in order to bring a clear demand to the table, right? If we want to demand peace and we want to say without doubt that peace is the only real solution to the area, we need to back that with as much knowledge as possible. So I first of all think that we need to keep on seeing what's happening on the ground, hearing about it, talking about it, not only from, let's say, me or other Israelis, but Palestinians as well. Um, but I also think that the international community has two main roles. The first one, and I think that is more specifically for Jewish diaspora communities. In Israel, there is a lot of effort by the Israeli government, the Israeli media, the Israeli educational department, education ministry to make the occupation visible. It's very easy to be an Israeli, to grow your entire life, to grow up in Israel. I grew up in Jerusalem. I grew up in a city that is divided according to the international law. And I did not know that. I did not know that the Green Line crosses Jerusalem. I did not know some of the kids from my class were not citizens of Israel. I had kids in the same class that I went to from Eastern Jerusalem that weren't citizens. I had no idea. Um, it's very easy to be an Israeli without knowing what's actually happening and what's being done in our behalf. And if I wasn't serving as a combatant, and if I wasn't sent to the West Bank or in Gaza, I could have just as well keep on living my life without knowing anything. And I think we need help with people holding up the mirror in front of us, saying, you are being misled. And it is starting to happen in Israel now. It's very hard not to see the images from Gaza, as of now within Israel, of the starvation, of using food as a weapon, shooting at people from within the humanitarian aid centers. Um, it's starting to be a lot more difficult not to see. Uh, but since again, we grew up in a very specific narrative, showing us very specific things are shown to us. It's very easy to deny, right? A lot of the Israelis who are dealing with the starvation in Gaza right now are talking about the Hamas propaganda pictures and videos of hungry kids. and they are accusing the Israeli government of not having a very well funded and effective Hasbara mechanism, propaganda mechanism,
Mhm.
instead of talking about what really is the problem, which is the starvation in Gaza and the fact that we're using food as a weapon against all Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. We need help to see if Jewish communities and the international community will demand our response to the reality, that will be important. The fact that France now declare they're supporting and acknowledging the Palestinian state, and the only solution is two-state solution, that created a debate within the Israeli society. That's crucial for people to hear that the world has an interest in what's going on here, and for the international community and the Jewish community abroad to demand honest answers about what's being done in our behalf. And that, I think, that's the first necessary step, or one of the roles that the international community needs to take. And the second one, I think, just like in any other international crisis, war, occupation, there are actions that needs to be done. Now, I'm not an expert on international relations. I don't know if the right action is to deny support or to condition aid or to ban settler goods from wherever it is. But there are a lot of actions that you can do that needs to be done. You need to hold your governments accountable, specifically yours in Canada, accountable for whatever support it gives us and where that support goes. I think I'm very much pro countries in the world supporting Israel. I would like that support to go to the Israeli academia and health system and education system and NGOs and welfare. There's a lot of good things that's happening in Israel. Not the occupation, not the war. You should not support that, and you need to let your governments know that as clear as possible. So there are actions that can be done. What I do think is one of the key things that the international community needs to do now is change the semantics about the situation in Israel Palestine. As of now, the conversation, the discourse is whether you're pro Israel or pro Palestine. If you support Israel, then you don't think Palestinians exist or should have a state, or they are all terrorists. If you're pro Palestinians, then Israel is a colonial state that should not exist and has no rights. But I don't think that's the right discourse. I think the conversation has to change. It has to change. And the question is, are you pro a forever war and death, which you have Israelis and Palestinians in that group, or you're pro peace and equality, and you have Israelis and Palestinians in that group as well, right? The common chant of "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" is a crucial chant, but that doesn't mean Israel and me as an Israeli, a Jewish Israeli, has no right living here. I was born here, I grew up here, I want to stay here. But for me to be here with equality, in peace, allowing my young daughter not to have to run to bomb shelters in the middle of the night, for that to happen, Palestine has to be free as well. And that's the discourse we have to change. It's not either you're pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian, you're either pro forever war and death or pro peace and equality. That's it.
Mhm. That's it's critical to hear that. There's, of course, it's very, very difficult to try to make this happen in the diaspora in different ways than it's difficult to do in Israel. Um, So maybe as I'm mentioning a couple of ways that Canadians, and in particular Canadian Jews, can mobilize, people in the group can start thinking about other potential ideas that they might have, keeping in mind what Amir said. Um, from what I gather from that, that would require quite a systemic shift in the way, and especially what you're saying about being pro-peace and quiet, or being pro-death and war, rather than saying you're pro-Palestine or pro-Israel within Canadian Jewish institutions. That would take quite a shift. And so I think we collectively can start thinking about what the steps going into that shift might look like, what the feasibility of that is, and kind of how we can grasp onto this moment where it seems like slowly but surely the culture is starting to open up to the idea that there is suffering going on in Gaza. I think there's less awareness of that in the West Bank within our community, but that is something that can also potentially change. We have a lot of work to do, but at least on a government level, we know that Canada is shifting slowly. Um, they are calling for immediate ceasefire. That's something that they've been calling for a long time. They are denouncing settlement expansion, and forced displacement as violation of international law. These are all words that our government have put forth along with their allies. It's not by any means the action that is needed. But there is an opening because of these words to demand action and to mobilize collectively. Um, there are a few ways that we can do that. The first is by starting by thanking politicians who have signed on to statements or taken actions that we support. So politicians, they care about public opinion, and they um, often only hear the loudest voices that are against these kinds of statements. And so if we can thank them and then ask them to do more, that can be a really kind of helpful window in. And they also track correspondence, like within the bureaucracy of the Canadian government. They take note of appreciation, and they take note of criticism as well. And for sure, the right wing is going against the statements that have been put forth in the last couple of weeks and the last couple of months. So it is our job as the progressive camp to thank and ask for more. So we can do that by writing to our MP, especially if they sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and urge stronger action on humanitarian aid and diplomatic pressure for a ceasefire. We can call out settler violence in the West Bank through those same means as well, including thanking Canada for sanctions against extremist settlers, and we can demand further action is taken. We can acknowledge Canada's aid to and contributions to date, and also ask that they increase this, meeting the scale of the crisis, and increase pressure through action, through an arms embargo, for example. We can sign petitions from NIFC's partners, including groups like JSpace Canada, which does focus on this political level. They have put forth a lot of petitions, and we can put the website on the chat, to encourage MPs to meet with these organizations. We can ask to just listen to JSpace's calls to action. They've been organizing and going to committees and trying to get Palestinian statehood to be recognized as well. So now that France has said that they will recognize the state of Palestine, that's also a really promising opening for Canadians to demand the same thing from Canada. There has been a committee to make that to kind of discuss that within the Canadian government. So again, when there's a little bit happening, we can do a lot more, and we can ask for a lot more. But I think we also need to be mindful of integrating our demands with thank yous and shows of appreciation, because politicians like that, and that's helpful for them, and that can help them kind of continue forward. So that's on the political level. And I think on a personal level, what each of us can do is go this week alone and just speak to at least one other person in our community about what we learned from this webinar. Um, we can have difficult conversations with the people in our lives who we know are maybe not on the same page as us, but who might be more open to having this discussion now, especially given the atrocities that are going on in Gaza, and just try to open a window. I think something that I've learned personally is that when you hear something from someone that you trust and love, that you are much more inclined to receive it than if you hear it from a stranger. And so a big part of that is also meeting people where they're at, but also making sure that you're kind of bringing yourself forward and where you're at forward. So those are some suggestions from things that we've compiled from the New Gen Council. Maybe let's open it up a little bit and see if there's anyone here who wants to either speak directly or write in the chat any potential calls to action that they've already applied or that they think could be useful for this group. Seeing any hands? Um, yes, there will be a recording. Does anyone have any suggestions, or even things? So this is a pretty small group, so I think it's quite uh, safe to be able to just speak up. I saw Michael turn on his camera, so you can go ahead, Michael.
Apologize for being late, and I had the camera off just because I was eating and I didn't want to be rude. But yeah, I think in terms of calls to action, I did. I'm not. I'm not. And this is like I'm linking to another thing, but I'm really happy to connect anyone to either like Sarah Goodman or Karen Isaacs, who like probably most folks know, that are working with some Palestinians on calls to action. A lot of it's been around Canadian admission of Palestinians from Gaza into the country, but also some other issues. And I just think it's a very good space for folks who are looking to do some in-person things, but also wary sometimes of whether a space is going to be comfortable for them. We're a diverse group, so it might vary, but I think this is probably a pretty comfortable one. And for the one coming up on Tuesday, I think that they're still in like a planning stage. I mean, it's Sunday, so I don't know how much that's true, but if there are folks that just have like this immediate spark of energy, I think it's a good one.
Yeah, and you don't know what is happening on Tuesday or kind of the location
I
or anything
I
like that.
have that's true. I do have some more details. I think it's Nathan Phillips Square. I think they are thinking about like some people sort of striking for the whole day. Um, but I imagine that there's going to be opportunities to like get involved that are beyond the entire day, which is obviously a bigger ask. Beyond that, I don't have all the details, but yeah, Helena, so I'm gonna just I'll send my number there and I'd say like Karen Isaacs, especially also is well known here as someone who's just she's been an on the ground organizer in Israel and Palestine and is just bringing a lot of that here. So it's a good way to get involved.
Thanks, Michael. Feel free to continue to put calls to action in the chat. I think we'll move on to Q&A since we want to be mindful of time. Um, oh, yes, this is helpful, Polly. Thank you. So Polly mentioned protective presence in the West Bank. Um, maybe Amir, do you want to take that, or do you want me to speak to that?
Yeah, I can do that. And maybe yeah, just add on with your personal experience if you've been, as you said, been in Umm but um, well, protective presence is in practice a very simple activism, right? Basically, what we a lot of the activists do, I do less in the last few years, but we just joined Palestinian farmers held on for the grazing, just escorting them on agricultural land for a few reasons. The first one is to be able to provide language. If soldiers, police officers, or even settlers are coming to attack, to disrupt, to provocate, the language barrier is very significant in order to provide some protection to the Palestinian farmers, and also to document, walking around with cameras, making sure everything is documented, making sure to know exactly if the land that we're using right now is state land, private land, exactly what to do, exactly where to be. Um, I do think that protective presence is, I think it's mostly crucial in creating a reality of co-resisting, not doing something for Palestinians, not doing something on behalf of, just walking together on the ground with Palestinians in solidarity, which has a huge impact both on um, Palestinians, both on ourselves. I know my experiences in protecting presence were very important for my political perspective. And I think more than that, it has a lot of impact that we don't necessarily see on IDF soldiers. I know that my encounter with breaking the silence tools in Hebron or protected presence in other places in the West Bank as a soldier kind of blew my mind a little bit and kind of made me think about a lot of things. And again, because it's there's a lot of effort to for us as Israelis not to see the occupation, not to see what is actually happening, why, to whom, and by who. And just meeting Israelis, walking around with Palestinians, talking to me as a soldier, explaining what's going on is that had a huge impact on me as a soldier. Um, I think that it whether the right was the question was the right to, was the right profile of someone. It's only a matter of will. That's I don't think there's a profile. I don't think that there are people who will be good or bad at it. I just think it's a matter of will. And I do know that a lot of the groups you've shared on the chat are groups that are giving trainings before you go to the field on de-escalation, on nonviolent resistance, on a lot of actions that help us try to de-escalate situations that we're in. Um, Things can be violent. I was attacked. A lot of the activists are being attacked by soldiers, by settlers, but it's crucial that we'll hold on to our um, nonviolence, I don't know, Zen essence. We need to de escalate situations as much as possible. Um, so I think it's only a matter of will and not a matter of profile. And again, they give trainings.
Yeah, and Polly, to answer your follow-up question, yeah, I did protective presence very, very briefly last summer. Speakers, people who speak English, that was the kind of main group of people who were doing protective presence with me. Um, no Arabic or Hebrew, and then yeah, I think people from that look very, that all look very different were doing it. So I don't think that that's a consideration, but Amir, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. And I can say that the community members in Umm Khair who have been reaching out to me have been pretty desperate for protective presence. There's been a shortage of people who have been going, and so they've been really asking if I know anyone, if people in my community would be interested or willing. And so there really is, I mean, I think that probably the most impactful thing we can do to use our privilege of being able to go to the land so easily is to do protective presence. And then beyond that, continuing to support through donating and through speaking up and educating the people around us is also it's critical. Um, I'm aware that we're almost at 3. Are there any other questions? Does anyone want to either write them in the chat or turn on their mic and speak directly? So Hannah wrote, where are the Palestinian communities that are being displaced by settler violence going?
I will say that's a good question and one of the most heartbreaking questions because Some of them we know the communities we're in contact with. We know that the smaller communities are just moving into area B or A, rebuilding villages in areas B and A, uh, cramping into smaller areas with not as much land that they used to have. Most of the Palestinians in Safariata and the Jordan Valley who are being displaced are farmers and shepherds, and they live traditional lives. And we know that they don't really have the opportunity to rebuild the same villages with the same lifestyle in areas A and B because it is a bit more uh, um, crowded. That's the word, right? It's a full populated, less agricultural land. So some of them, the smaller communities, are rebuilding, but we know that some of the bigger communities are dispersing. In the village of Zenuta, the biggest village from the South Yemen Hills that was displaced and some of them were able to come back after a few months. But it was a community of about 250 people, a relative big community in the South Yemen Hills. When they were displaced, some of them went to friends and family in different villages in the area. Some moved to Yatta, the big city in the area, in area A. Some tried to rebuild the village in area B, but community kind of collapsed. They didn't move together. And that varies. But one of the most heartbreaking things is a lot of those communities are just spreading all over the place, um, mostly to areas A and B.
Yeah, and something in terms of Zanuta, we through the Naomi Chazan Fellowship last summer, walked through the village, after it was already pillaged and people were displaced, and we saw the kind of how the houses were wrecked. We saw how the school was um completely dismantled. Books were ripped and burned, and there were even beer bottles and kind of all over beside the school, kind of showing just kind of shape in my at least in my mind, like shaping the story of how this horrible pogrom played out. Um, and yeah, I think it's just atrocious, and I think, again, kind of I can't personally, I can't help but drawing parallels between things that Jewish people have suffered and gone through and what's going on in the West Bank. And so I think we do have a collective responsibility to continue to share and speak up and talk to our communities, to our politicians, even and when things get tough and when it's really difficult sometimes to engage in this work. I think that's the moment where it's so important to lean on others in this community, and speak to one another, and just really try to sustain ourselves and prevent ourselves from burning out through action. Um, so unless there's any other questions, I wanna give Amir another chance if there's anything that you wanted to add that you think we haven't yet addressed, before we close off.
I will say, obviously, we can talk for hours on what's going on in the occupied territories. I'll just end by saying that I think it's crucial to understand that everything that's happening in the occupied territories is because of policy, is because of political choices. It's not because violent settlers, which are relatively a small group of Israelis. It's not because of IDF soldiers. It's not because of no matter who. It is how we as a country decide to act politically. It's a political decision, as I think that's crucial to understand, but because it has, in my point of view, a very optimistic bottom line. It doesn't have to be this way. It's not a force of nature. It's not gravity. It's not something that can't be changed. It's a political choice, and as such, we can make a different one. And it is just as easy as that to end the Israeli occupation. Let's just decide that and try to build something better for everybody between the river and the sea. And I think as long as we hold on to the fact that it is a political choice, we can hold on to the idea that we can change it, and we should. and we have the ability and we have the power to do so. And everything that is being done now is being done in our behalf, and everything that will be done once we'll choose differently to build a better future for everybody between the river to the sea, that will be done in our behalf as well. And I very much want that to be the choice we're making, because again, I want to keep on living here. I want to stay here. I want to raise my kid here. I want to keep on speaking Hebrew and Arabic. And in order for that to happen, in order to save the state of Israel, in order to make the state of Israel a reality for forever, we have to end the Israeli occupation and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We have to. Because if not, that will be the end of the state of Israel. And I need your help to do so. And again, just thank you for the I don't even know how many years of relationship and working together in order to change the reality it has already happened, and just keep on working together as far as needed in order to change the reality, which is very much possible. Just thank you all for having this, for talking about, for making this part of your daily routine. That's not the obvious choice. And thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you very much, Amir. And I think that's a great way to end. A bit of a sliver of hope. So thanks very much for this conversation. Thanks everyone for taking time out of your day to discuss this. As Hannah wrote in the chat, we do have a group chat for NIFC New Gen. We also have emails that we send out pretty regularly about this kind of action that we can take both collectively and through supporting the work that's being done on the ground in Israel and Palestine. And we'll continue to keep this community updated throughout this very, very difficult time, and continue to lean on each other to make sure that we can do what we can and play our part. So thanks everyone.